National Police Choice Online News, and we have a very special guest today. None other than Mr. Beechworth Castagna, who is the owner of Beechworth Winery, and is located in Victoria, Australia. And he's going to tell us more about his vision and the story behind it. Mr. John, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
And please tell us, what was your driving force, founding this wonderful winery, and how did you bump into this wonderful, terroir?
Yes, I mean, always the most complicated thing is finding a piece of wonderful terroir. My intention, I came from another industry, and my intention was to try and make wine in Australia that stands with the best in the world, which I think we've achieved. So we found a piece of land by luck as much as anything else. I mean, there's always a degree of luck involved in almost anything you do. But I tasted wines around that area. I tasted wines across Australia. I looked for some time, and I keep coming back to this small piece of appellation called Beechworth. Beechworth is a very small appellation. It's one of Australia's smallest appellations. It's in northeast Victoria. But what's exciting about it is it's very ancient land, and it's a piece of land that rose out of the base of the land 500 million years ago, and so what you have is this plateau which looks very much like a top hat almost, which has very little rivers in it, so there's very little erosion. So what we have is ancient soils, which are quite skinny, meaning that they're not generous. And vines like that. Vines like to work. You get flavour out of vines when the vines have to work for what they bring to the fruit. So this is this, in my opinion, will one day be one of Australia's great pieces of winemaking land. Still, it was an important part of Australian winemaking history. In 1850s, it was still there. There were lots of vineyards there. Then phylloxera wiped out all the vineyards. And really, it started again in the early 80s, really, in the early 1980s. We are now about 30 vineyards. It's land that is best suited to the small producer rather than the large producer. It's quite hard to work. It's very rocky. There's a lot of preparation to get ready to plant vines. So big companies are really not interested in the amount of work that's required for small tracts of land. There aren't big tracts of land available. So my opinion is that Beechworth will one day be one of the premier wine regions of Australia, perhaps the world.
What's your criteria when you select a piece of land where you spot it and also envision?
Well, for me, I very much wanted to make wines that have the soul of Australia, but with the understanding of old Europe. So I think we're foolish to throw away everything that has been learnt over millennium. So when I make our top wine is a Shiraz, a Syrah-based wine. Although I don't want it to taste like the wines of the Northern Rhone, I want it to feel like the wines of the Northern Rhone. In the end, wine is something that is, in my opinion, is there to enhance food. That's its job. Its job is to make food taste better.
What is your definition of the soul of Australia that you have just spoken about?
Well, I guess you're talking about a brightness. I guess sunshine is part of that soul. But always, wine is made by the land and by an attitude. The land comes from nature, the attitude comes from man.
Amazing. You spoke about attitudes. Now, attitudes from man. What is your perception when you found this land and you cultivate it? Do you foresee and prepare for a plan B should it fail?
No, because that's actually not my. That's not part of my character. Failure is not something I counteract. Of course, it was always a possibility. Of course, but it seemed to me that winemaking is not brain surgery. And if I look at the great wines of the last 100 years, a lot of them were made by peasant farmers. Wine has become something of technology, but in many ways, I think that's a mistake. I think the most interesting wines, best is a horrible word, but interesting is something that I like. The most interesting wines come from wines made without artifacts, so that there is no interference with the process of growing and turning fruit from fruit into a beverage which then enhances food.
Mr. Castagna, we came to believe that the wines that you're making are all organic.
Well, they're biodynamic. Biodynamics is a process of farming which allows, in my opinion, the land to be itself. But it isn't a magic bullet. If I didn't have a wonderful vineyard, I can be as organic and biodynamic as I like. The quality would not be great. The reason why our wines are special is because I have a very special piece of land.
How important is this process of winemaking for you, and why do you choose biodynamics?
Well, again, it's about being having a truthful relationship with the soil, the place. Terroir isn't simply about the soil, it's also about the slope, about my attitude, about what happens with the weather, how you treat the fruit, whether you play silly buggers with it, and, because there are many scientific ways of changing. Many people would say improving wine. I don't subscribe to that. I think the best wine is made in the simplest fashion when you have the right terroir. If you don't have the right terroir, then manipulation is probably in order. But if you have the right terroir, the less manipulation you do, the better. And biodynamics is a way of making that truthful.
Now, do you have safety nets in place in your vineyard? Let's say if there's a drought or a forest fire, do you have these safety nets to protect the vineyards from being burned down and at the same time from drought?
Well, all of those things that you spoke about, we've actually had. So yes, we keep the land around us clear. So if we have fire, the fire doesn't have any fuel to come right up to the vineyard. but nothing is foolproof. We 3 years ago we had a fire that came within 100 meters of the vineyard, but it didn't do us any harm. Australia has been suffering from drought for some time, so I have irrigation available if required. But generally, in our vineyard, it isn't required. But we have had periods where we've had almost no rain at all for months and months. Well, under those circumstances, you need to give the vines some water, otherwise they'll die. So those are our safety nets, if you like. I mean, they're no different from what a conventional farmer would use. So that isn't something about that's special to how I farm. It's simply being a good farmer.
Do you enjoy farming yourself?
Yes, mostly I do. I enjoy the fruits of the farming, and so like everything else in life, nothing is for nothing. So there is a cost. But I do like being amongst the vines. I do like wandering amongst the vines. I do like talking to them, if you like, in my head, imagining. So you're always creating stories. So I'm not a traditional farmer, and therefore one of the advantages of that, and there are many disadvantages, but one of the advantages of that is that I'm not afraid to do things because I don't know what's wrong. So I do what I feel. And that's a huge advantage, and it has been a huge advantage in making wine, because my expertise is in taste, so I trust my palate.
How many varieties of wine are you making at your vineyard?
Okay, well we grow Shiraz, Syrah. We grow Sangiovese. Sangiovese is a grape variety of Tuscany, in Italy. We grow a white variety called Viognier, which comes from the northern Rhone. We grow a small amount of another Italian variety called Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo is the variety that makes the wines of Barolo and Barbaresco. We have also recently planted some more Chardonnay, and also a variety from the Loire Valley called Cheddar Blanc. So we're a very small enterprise. So really I make wines to suit myself, and I hope that the market is understanding enough to follow.
Now, these wines that you are making, are they handcrafted wines?
Yes,
do you consider?
Yes. Everything is really done by hand. We pick by hand. There is really no artifice in what we do. It's a very simple process. We grow fruit. We try and grow the very best fruit we possibly can. The fruit is picked by hand. It's put into fermenters. It starts its fermentation after a few days of sitting there by itself, without the addition of any yeast. Because if you add yeast, you change the flavour of the land. So we don't add any yeast. After somewhere between 12 and 20 days, fermentation is completed. The fruit is then pressed. Again, simply, it's put into barrels and left alone for 2 years. Then taken out of barrel and put into bottle and sold.
Now, we noticed that we tried a number of Shiraz varieties last night at the Hilton Singapore. Do you grow more Shiraz varieties than any other varieties in your vineyard?
Yes, Shiraz is my top, is what I grow mostly. Australia is very fortunate in as much as we have some amazing genetic material available to us. Genetic material that doesn't exist now anywhere else in the world. So what the Shiraz that we grow is a progeny of the cuttings that came from the Northern Rhone in 1850 to Australia, because there are huge parts, large rather than huge parts of Australia which are not have not yet been affected by phylloxera. So what we have is own root material which doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. It no longer exists in France, for example. And so we have pockets of these clones, if you like. They're not really clones, but they're of various growths of Shiraz that are really unique to that area. There are some in Victoria, some in mostly in South Australia, and they produce very small amount of fruit because they're not designed as much of the fruit is today to produce quantity, but the quality is amazing.
Now, why do you choose Shiraz to?
Oh, because I think I choose Shiraz because I think the land is suitable to Shiraz. So I think you need to listen to the land. You need to have an affinity between what the land says to you. The flavor, one of the things that I like about what we do is you can walk in my vineyard just before harvest, and pick the fruit and taste it, and even though it's sweet, clearly it's sweet because that's how the fermentation things happen, you can actually taste the flavors of our wine in the fruit. So all I'm really doing is I'm transferring the flavor of the land through grapes to wine. It's a judgment you make. That's what I do. I make judgments.
So, would you allow tourists and even visitors to come to your vineyards and walk around?
Yes, I do. We don't have a traditional cellar door because we're too small for that. But we have lots of visitors, and I'm always happy to welcome visitors. But they need to ring me first and make an appointment, and then I'm happy to show them. If they're truly interested, I'm happy to show them what we do and how we work.
So now, what's next for you for your upcoming vintages?
It's a process. As I mentioned earlier, we've put in a new grape variety, Chenin Blanc. So that's my next challenge, if you like, to see how that turns out. One never knows until you start making wine. I've no doubt that I can make wine. What I don't know yet is whether the wine will be great. And I'm really only interested in greatness.
Talking about greatness, Mr. Castagna, tell us what kind of challenges and risks does a wine owner and winemaker face when he first bought a piece of land?
Because it may be rubbish. Until you actually start growing fruit and making something of it, no one really knows how special it'll be. I know that I can make wine out of it. The vine is a weed. It'll grow anywhere. But whether it grows with integrity is another thing. For example, for us, 2011 was a very complex year. It produced a taste that was unlike the taste that we normally produce in our vineyard. So I made the very painful decision of not releasing anything at all from us in vintage 2011. So that's for somebody of our size, that's a huge complication, both emotionally and financially.
What's the secret of your success in marketing your wines?
Oh, I think we make great wine.
So,
And I try to communicate that.
so how do you go around marketing it other than yourself?
Well, I'm part. There is a group which is mostly French, but it now consists of just under 190 growers worldwide. It's called Renaissance. It was started in 2000 by a man called Nicolas Joly, and it's run by him and his daughter, who work very hard to make it work. And we have tastings once or twice a year around the world, and that's really the main thing that I do. We're very fortunate. I have people in many countries who like our wines and buy them, and so I try and do a yearly trip around saying hello to people and having tastings and doing much of what we did last night, where we're simply looking at wines, and people have an opportunity of questioning me and indeed telling me things that perhaps they don't like, and I'm always interested in constructive criticism.
Speaking about constructive criticism, especially from the National Critics' Choice online news, what is your main influence that caused you to open up a winery in the business of winery? Who were your heroes?
Well, there weren't. It wasn't so much people that were heroes, but wines that were heroes. I was fortunate to be in London during much of the 70s, when wine was still pretty much affordable, and there was a lot of wine around. So I was fortunate enough to be able to taste many of the great wines of the world. So while my friends were buying cars and other such luxuries, I spent my time and what funds I had buying wine and learning about wine. So when I came to a time in my life that I found what I was doing less than inspiring, I looked at what I knew, and I knew film and I knew wine, and if I no longer wanted to do film, there wasn't very much choice. I needed to see whether I could make wine. And as I said, I don't believe in the... I think the wine is made. What I do is I grow wine rather than make wine. So I believe I don't believe in the cult of the winemaker, I believe in the cult of the wine grower.
Speaking from an experienced filmmaker and as a wine owner, what would be the 3 key advice which you give to aspiring wine owners or wine investors? Because we have Singaporeans, Vietnamese, Thais, and people around the world who are planning to buy a vineyard and wants to grow wine the way you do. So what would be the 3 key advice we should give to them, in your experience?
Well, do it because you love it, and be prepared to lose, because it is easy to lose. And to be honest about your product. The most important thing is to have an honesty with the consumer. It's easy to trick somebody once, but that's of no interest to me. What I'm looking for is long-term relationship with consumers, so that they have trust in what we do and what I say. And so I advise, I think there is a different advice to somebody who wants to invest and somebody who wants to do it themselves, to be hands-on. I think if you want to invest, you have to find a partner that you like, that you have a relationship with, and that there is a trust backwards and forwards between you. And I think there is a place for that. There are people who don't want to get their hands dirty, but have the finances available to help small companies move forward. But if you want to do it, if you want to get your hands dirty and do something which is, if you want to become a farmer, then you have to be committed. It's not something that you do for fun for a few days. You have to be committed. And there are many times, for example, during the winemaking process, that I might not sleep because I'm looking after the wine. Now, it doesn't happen very often, but if the wine says I need to be looked after, and it sounds silly, but wine behaves in a particular fashion. And sometimes it changes what it does very quickly. Now, when it changes very quickly, it's necessary to be around to help if it requires help.
Mr. Castagna, it's interesting that you brought the issue about the way the wine behaves, and the wine has a behavior towards men while they process it.
Yeah.
Is there any mistake or one mistake you have made during the wine processing and being a wine owner? Is there one mistake that you have made that you have learned?
Oh, one learns all the time. I try not to make a mistake. The most important decision I make is when I cut the fruit. It's what you're trying to achieve all the time is optimum ripeness without over-ripeness. So there are some varieties like Viognier, for example, that really absolutely need to be picked within hours of being ready. Sometimes even 12 hours can change the taste. So when you're someone as small as us, that's possible. But if you're very large, you have to make compromises which simply affect the taste. So one of the advantages of being small, and there are disadvantages as well, especially from an organisation and financial point of view, one of the advantages of being small is that you have absolute control of what happens. I can taste barrels weekly. I can work out when to pick on an hourly basis if necessary. So all of that is possible, and it's simply not possible when you're a huge enterprise.
Now, for our first-time viewers, listeners, and readers on the National Critics' Choice, what would be your recommendation in Asia, especially, who are going to explore more about your wine? What would be the first bottle of wine or label they should look for?
I don't really want to encourage anyone to go for a particular label, because I think that's not fair. But I think there's only one way to learn about wine, and that's to drink it. So information, there is so much written in terms of publications about wine. So if you're interested, there is much that's available. So you do have to do some work. There are courses that can be done. It's always best to start off with some information. the advice I give to anyone who's starting is to, whenever you taste a wine, write down, get yourself a little book and write down what you think. Sometimes it will be as simple as, I don't like this. But it will be amazing how 6 months later that will change into something else. So, and to be honest about what goes into your mouth.
Now, since you're traveling around Asia, what was your best experience so far that you have paired your wines with Southeast Asian cuisine?
What have I told you? I guess, I mean, one of the things that I mean, in terms of our red wines, I think that Genesis, it has a quality of spice which works really well with the lower grade spicy Asian foods. Our Viognier, for example, works amazingly with sweet fish dishes. So what you're doing all the time is, there isn't a magic pairing. It's a matter of always trying to find a new way into something. I mean, for example, last night we had some octopus which had some chili in it, and yet the wine held it. So that was very exciting for me to taste, because if I had tasted that without the wine, I would have thought it would have overpowered the wine, but it didn't, because the wine had coolness and freshness, and so it combined beautifully.
One of our viewers and listeners would like to ask you, have you tried the Singapore durian yet?
Yes, no, I like durian. Durian is a complication for me because I love the taste but I hate the smell.
How would you pair a good wine with durian?
I don't know that I can. I don't know that I can. I had I don't know, a custardy, ice creamy durian the other day, which was just delicious, and it had none of the odors that you have on the fresh durian. Now, clearly, this was fresh. It was in a very good restaurant, and I thought that this is a lovely way to taste it. It had almost no sweetness, but sort of a lovely, buttery, rich, taste. delicious quality.
And that would probably go well with some of your white wines, I suppose.
Yes, I think it would. Yes,
with durian pastries. Yes, of course.
Yes, I think it would.
Well, Singaporeans and Asians, do take note. You know, you could pair with good wine, so long as it's not the real fruit, but pastries, durian pastries, that is, and including expats. So, before we go, what's your philosophy of enjoying and making great wine? Do you think that the future of wine is it going to continue to evolve? Especially, there are many who said that they're going to change, from corks to screw caps.
Okay. Well, I mean, look, I think you have to decide what wine is, whether it's simply a drink or whether it's an experience. For professionals, there is no doubt that it's easier to open a bottle with a screw cap. My personal experience is that people who save to buy something expensive to then enjoy at a special time, that there is an added pleasure to the ritual of opening a bottle. We have to remember why we've gone to screw cap. We went to screw caps, especially in Australia, because we were being sent rubbish corks. So there was a lot of corks that were contaminating the wine. That's changing slowly. We ourselves made the decision to go to a manufactured cork. It's a cork called Diam. and we were one of the first to go that way. I decided to do that rather than go to screw cap, because screw cap doesn't suit me emotionally. So Diam, we went to Diam in 2003, and from 2003 until today, which is 2014, I have not had one bottle that's been faulty.
Wow, amazing track record you have.
Yeah.
So how can our viewers find out more information about your winery?
Well, they could go to our website, www.castagna.com.au, and I think you'll find almost, and they can, I mean, we sell also via mail order. Unfortunately, to ship from Australia to Asia is expensive, but it's possible.
Well, Mr. Julian Castagna, thank you for joining us.